The massive chamber stretched before Jake Morrison like a steel canyon filled with alien voices and hostile stares. He sat at the small human table near the back of the Galactic Council Hall, while hundreds of other species filled the curved rows that rose up to the ceiling. The air smelled of sulfur and ozone from the different atmospheric mixers that kept everyone breathing. Jake had been coming to these meetings for 3 years now, and each time felt the same cold rejection from the other delegates. Lisa Hayes stood behind his chair in her crisp military uniform. She watched the crowd with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her hand rested near her sidearm, though weapons were forbidden in the council chambers. The gesture was more habit than preparation, but it made Jake feel better to have her there. They had worked together since the first human contact with the galactic community, and she understood the politics as well as he did. The speaker platform held a tall figure with blue skin and 4 arms. Thexvar had been the council speaker for over 200 years according to the files. His species controlled the most trade routes and had the largest military fleet in known space. When he spoke, the entire chamber fell silent, except for the soft hum of translation devices. The motion by the human delegation regarding trade equality has been reviewed by the Economic Committee, Thexvar announced in his deep voice. The committee finds that humanity lacks the experience and stability required for full trade partnership status. Jake felt his jaw tighten. This was the same excuse they had used for the colonial rights proposal last month and the defense cooperation agreement before that. Every human request was met with condescending lectures about their young species needing guidance from their elders. The fact that humans had been spacefaring for over 3 centuries seemed to mean nothing to these ancient civilizations. The Zephyrian delegate rose from his seat in the front row. His people looked like tall insects, with wings that buzzed when they spoke. Honored Speaker, my people have observed human behavior in the Outer Rim territories. They show concerning levels of emotional response to situations that require calm, logical thinking. Perhaps another 50 years of observation would be wise before considering any expansion of their privileges. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Jake had heard this argument countless times. Humans were too emotional, too unpredictable, too quick to act without proper consideration. The fact that these same traits had helped humanity survive and thrive in hostile environments that other species avoided was never mentioned in these discussions. The crystalline Vaxon representative clicked its approval from across the chamber. The sound echoed off the walls like breaking glass. The Vaxon Collective agrees with the Zephyrian assessment. Humans require additional guidance before they can be trusted with significant responsibilities in galactic affairs. Lisa leaned down to whisper in Jake's ear. The vote count looks the same as always. We have maybe 3 supporters out of 850 delegates. Jake nodded without turning around. The Cathari would vote with humanity because they understood what it meant to be dismissed and ignored. The Bolani had their own struggles with the Council's bureaucracy and usually supported human proposals. The Rim Collective was desperate for any allies they could find. Everyone else would vote against any human advancement because it threatened their comfortable positions in the galactic hierarchy. Thexvar called for the formal vote. All in favor of granting humanity expanded trade equality status. 3 lights appeared on the massive display board. Jake did not need to count them to know the result. All opposed to the motion. 847 lights filled the board like angry stars. The rejection was complete and overwhelming, just like every other human proposal that had come before the Council. The motion fails by a significant margin, Thexvar announced with what sounded like satisfaction. This concludes the consideration of human proposals for this session. Jake stood slowly from his chair. The chamber began to empty as delegates moved on to other business. Most of them did not even look in his direction as they filed past the human table. He had prepared for this moment during the long journey to the council station. The words had been chosen carefully and reviewed by the Earth government. Honored "Speaker," Jake said in a clear voice that carried across the chamber. The exodus of delegates slowed as his words echoed from the translation system. Thexvar looked down at him with obvious irritation. The human delegation was not granted permission to address the council further. "I am not requesting permission," Jake replied. "I am making an announcement." The chamber fell completely silent. In 50,000 years of galactic civilization, no species had ever made an unauthorized announcement during a council session. The display screens around the room focused on Jake's face as he spoke the words that would change everything. "The United Earth Federation hereby withdraws from the Galactic Council effective immediately. We will honor our existing contracts with individual species, but we are done seeking approval from this body. Humanity walks its own path now." Lisa stepped forward to stand beside him as the silence stretched on. 850 delegates stared at the two humans in complete shock. No species had ever voluntarily left the council. The idea was so unprecedented that none of them seemed to know how to respond. Jake picked up his briefcase and walked toward the exit with Lisa beside him. Their footsteps echoed in the vast chamber as hundreds of alien eyes followed their movement. When they reached the doors, Jake paused and looked back at the assembly one final time. "Good luck," he said quietly, then walked out of galactic politics forever. The bridge of the UES horizon hummed with quiet efficiency as Commander Ryan Blake watched the last transport ships prepare for departure. 6 months had passed since Ambassador Morrison walked out of the Galactic Council chambers, and the evacuation was nearly complete. Through the main viewport, he could see dozens of massive cargo vessels loaded with equipment, supplies, and the final wave of human colonists, leaving council space forever. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the science station, reviewing her tablet with a frown. As head of the Colonial Science Division, she had overseen the dismantling of humanity's vast infrastructure across council territory. The numbers were staggering even to her. "Commander, final count shows we've removed 12,000 research stations, 400 industrial complexes, and 89 major terraforming operations." Ryan nodded as he processed the information. The speed of the withdrawal had surprised everyone, including the humans themselves. When the order came down from Earth Command, the response had been immediate and total. Every human facility, every research outpost, every mining operation had been packed up and relocated within 6 months. Nothing of value was left behind for the council species to claim. "What about the survey data?" Ryan asked. "All of it came with us," Elena replied with satisfaction. 15,000 star systems beyond council space, complete geological surveys, atmospheric analysis, resource mapping. The council never bothered to explore past their comfortable borders, but our people have been mapping the galaxy for decades. The communication officer looked up from her console. "Commander, incoming transmission from the Cathari vessel approaching our position." "Put it through." The main screen flickered and showed the face of Ambassador Veltar. The Cathari looked like a cross between a fox and a bird with golden fur and large intelligent eyes. His expression was desperate as he spoke. "Commander Blake, I must speak with your leadership about humanity's decision. My people cannot understand why you would abandon your allies who supported you in the council." Ryan felt sympathy for the alien diplomat. The Cathari had been good friends to humanity, and one of the few species that had consistently voted in support of human proposals. But the decision had been made at the highest levels, and there would be no changing it. "Ambassador, I appreciate your concern and your people's friendship. Captain Carter is waiting to speak with you in Conference Room 3. A few minutes later, Captain Michelle Carter sat across from the Cathari diplomat in the small meeting room. She had known Veltar for 2 years and considered him a genuine friend despite their different species. His distress was obvious as he leaned forward in his chair. "Michelle, you must reconsider this withdrawal. Without human support, the Council will become even more dominated by the older species. Small civilizations like mine will have no voice at all. Michelle chose her words carefully. Veltar, we value your friendship and your people's support over the years, but we cannot continue to participate in a system that treats us as children while expecting us to solve their problems. We're not abandoning our friends, but we won't be caged anymore. But what about the trade agreements, the research partnerships, the defense cooperation? These relationships took decades to build. Individual agreements with species like yours will continue, Michelle assured him. We're leaving the Council structure, not cutting all contact with galactic civilization. When your people are ready to deal with us as equals rather than going through Council bureaucracy, we'll be here. Meanwhile, in the intelligence section of the ship, Lieutenant Commander Scott Davis reviewed the latest reports from Deep Space Reconnaissance. The information would have made Council leaders very nervous if they had access to it. Human long. Range scouts had been busy during the withdrawal, mapping routes and locations far beyond the galactic rim where no other species had ever ventured. The construction reports were even more significant. Engineering teams had identified 17 locations in the void between galactic arms where massive space habitats could be built. Each site offered unique advantages, including access to rare materials, strategic positioning, and isolation from potential interference. The preliminary designs called for artificial worlds that could support millions of people while remaining completely mobile if necessary. Dr. Kevin James coordinated the scientific aspects of the withdrawal from his position aboard the research vessel Newton. As the convoy of human ships moved away from Council space, he compiled data that painted a disturbing picture of galactic civilization. Without human innovation and problem-solving abilities, dozens of critical projects were already falling behind schedule. The Beltar plague research had been a joint effort between human medical teams and Council scientists. Human doctors had been close to developing a cure when the withdrawal order came. Now the project would likely fail without their expertise, and the disease would continue spreading through 3 vulnerable species. The hegemony conflict had been contained for over a decade through human peacekeeping efforts and diplomatic initiatives. With human forces gone, the violence was already escalating in border regions. Intelligence reports suggested that full-scale warfare could resume within months without human mediators to maintain the fragile ceasefire agreements. Captain Sarah Wilson commanded the defense perimeter as the human fleet reorganized in deep space. Her ships formed a protective barrier around the slower transport vessels, while long-range sensors monitored for any pursuit. The Council had made no military moves to stop the exodus, but tension remained high among the human commanders. "Any sign of Council forces?" she asked her tactical officer. "Negative, Captain. Long-range scans show normal patrol patterns in Council space. No indication of organized pursuit or interference with our withdrawal." Sarah was not surprised by the lack of military response. The Council had always treated humanity as a minor irritation rather than a serious threat. They probably assumed that humans would come crawling back within a few years, when the reality of isolation set in. That assumption would prove to be a serious miscalculation. The final transport cleared Council space just as the Horizon's communication array picked up frantic transmissions from Council headquarters. Multiple species were demanding explanations for humanity's departure and its implications for their own operations. The Vaxxon Mining Consortium had already requested emergency assistance to replace human engineers who could work in extreme conditions that other species found impossible. Ryan. Blake smiled as he listened to the intercepted messages. The galaxy was starting to understand what they had lost when they dismissed humanity as too young and inexperienced to deserve equal treatment. The real lesson would come in the months and years ahead when the full impact of human withdrawal became clear. The last human ship disappeared into hyperspace, leaving Council territory behind forever. In the cargo holds and data banks of the fleeing vessels lay the seeds of a new civilization that would prove to the galaxy what humans could accomplish when freed from the constraints of others' expectations. General Alex Turner stood on the observation deck of Frontier Station, watching another council delegation approach the human perimeter. 2 years had passed since humanity withdrew from galactic politics, and the requests for contact had become a daily occurrence. This delegation flew Zephyrian colors, which meant they were probably here about the pirate attacks in the outer spiral regions. The communication officer approached with a data pad. General, the Zephyrian delegation is requesting permission to enter human space for diplomatic negotiations. They claim to have urgent matters regarding mutual security concerns. Alex reviewed the request with tired eyes. Every delegation that approached the border claimed their mission was urgent and critical to galactic stability. The Vaxxon had sent 6 separate groups requesting assistance with their failing mining operations. The hegemony factions wanted human mediators to restart peace talks. Even species that had never spoken to humans before were suddenly desperate for contact. "Send them the standard response," Alex ordered. "The United Earth Federation will consider diplomatic contact when the Galactic Council is prepared to offer equal representation and mutual respect." The young officer nodded and relayed the message. Through the viewport, Alex watched the Zephyrian ships hold position for several minutes before slowly turning away. Like all the others, they would return to council space with their mission unfulfilled, and their leaders frustrated by human refusal to engage. Dr. Kevin James monitored galactic communications from his position at the Titan Research Station. The intelligence data painted a disturbing picture of decline and chaos spreading through council territory. Without human peacekeepers and diplomats, old conflicts were resurging with increasing violence. The carefully maintained balance that had kept the galaxy stable for decades was crumbling. The hegemony conflict had exploded back into full warfare 3 months ago. 7 star systems were now battlegrounds as ancient enemies settled scores without human mediators to maintain ceasefire agreements. Refugee streams were overwhelming council relief efforts, and the violence showed no signs of stopping. The Beltar plague had claimed its 3rd species last week. Human medical teams had been within months of developing a cure when the withdrawal began. Council scientists were making progress, but their approach was slower and less innovative than human methods. Millions would die before they found an alternative solution. Trade routes that humanity had protected for decades now fell prey to increasingly bold pirate fleets. The Council's military response was hampered by bureaucracy and interspecies rivalry. Without human forces providing rapid response and coordination, entire shipping lanes had become too dangerous for commercial traffic. Admiral Carol Stone reviewed the latest intelligence reports from her flagship in the outer perimeter. The data confirmed what human leaders had suspected from the beginning. The galaxy needed humanity far more than humanity needed the galaxy. Council civilization was built on comfortable assumptions that someone else would handle the dangerous and difficult problems. "Admiral, we're intercepting increased emergency transmissions from Council space," reported the intelligence officer. "Requests for medical assistance, engineering support, military cooperation. The volume has tripled in the past month." Carol was not surprised by the trend. The Council had taken human capabilities for granted while treating humans as junior, partners unworthy of equal status. Now they were learning the true cost of that arrogance as their carefully ordered civilization began to fall apart without human problem solvers to maintain it. The Vaxxon mining operations were collapsing at an accelerating rate. Human engineers had been the only ones capable of working in the extreme conditions of their deep core extraction facilities. Without them, the output had dropped by 70%, and several major installations had been abandoned entirely as too dangerous for other species to operate. Captain Danny Rodriguez commanded the deep space monitoring station that tracked movement along the galactic rim. His sensors had detected something that would have terrified council leaders if they had known about it. Massive human construction projects were underway in the void between galactic arms, far beyond the reach of any council authority. The preliminary reports suggested artificial habitats on a scale that defied imagination. Entire cities were being built in space, using resources and techniques that other species had never considered possible. The humans were not just surviving in exile, they were thriving and expanding at a rate that made their previous colonial efforts look modest by comparison. Engineer Nancy White supervised construction of the third mega-habitat from her position aboard the industrial platform Zeus. The project was ahead of schedule and under budget despite the challenges of building in deep space. Human adaptability and innovation were proving themselves in an environment where other species would have failed completely. "Nancy, the structural framework for sections 7 through 12 is complete," reported her assistant. "We're ready to begin atmosphere installation and gravity generation." Nancy smiled as she reviewed the progress reports. Each habitat could support more people than most council homeworlds while remaining completely mobile if relocation became necessary. The freedom to build without bureaucratic oversight and committee approvals had unleashed human creativity on an unprecedented scale. Dr. Pete Johnson made breakthrough discoveries in quantum tunneling technology that would have revolutionized galactic travel if shared with council species. Instead, the research remained locked behind human borders, along with dozens of other innovations that could have solved major galactic problems. The Council had forfeited their access to human knowledge when they chose to treat humans as inferior partners. The three species that had followed humanity into exile were experiencing their own renaissance. The Cathari, Balani, and Rim Collective had been minor powers under Council rule, but were rapidly developing into formidable civilizations with human support and technology. Their combined fleets now rivaled the military strength of major Council. Powers. Chief Scientist Mary Clark's discovery of zero-point energy extraction could have ended the galaxy's power crisis overnight. The technology was clean, efficient, and scalable to any size, from personal devices to planetary installations. Council scientists had been struggling with energy shortages for decades, while the solution had been within reach if they had treated human researchers as equals rather than assistants. Long-range sensors detected the launch of massive human expeditions toward the galactic rim and beyond. The implications were staggering for anyone who understood what they were seeing. Humanity was not planning to return to Council space or seek readmission to galactic civilization. They were moving beyond the galaxy entirely to territories that no other species had ever imagined reaching. The silence from human space had become deafening to Council ears. No requests for assistance, no offers of cooperation, no interest in galactic affairs that had once seemed so important to human diplomats. The species that had once been eager to participate in galactic civilization now ignored it completely while building something far greater in the darkness between stars. Ambassador Phil Carter received daily reports from the independent worlds that had chosen to ally with humanity rather than remain under Council authority. These planets had become beacons of prosperity and innovation that stood in sharp contrast to the declining conditions in Council territory. The message was clear, to anyone willing to see it. Life was better outside the Council's control than within it. Captain Danny Rodriguez transmitted the status report that would have sent shockwaves through Council space if they had been able to intercept it. 3 years had passed since humanity's exodus, and the transformation was beyond anything the galaxy could have imagined. From his position aboard New Olympus Station, he watched construction teams putting the finishing touches on the 7th mega-habitat, while the 8th was already taking shape in the distance. Control center to all stations, New Olympus is now fully operational, Danny announced into his communication system. Population stands at 12 million with industrial capacity exceeding pre-Exodus levels by 340%. Defense grid is online and expanding according to schedule. The numbers represented a revolution in space construction and habitat design. Without council regulations and bureaucratic oversight, human engineers had been free to pursue radical, new approaches to artificial world building. The results were structures that dwarfed anything in council space while being completely mobile and self-sufficient. Engineer Nancy White floated through the zero-gravity construction zone of the newest habitat, checking progress on systems that would have been impossible under council safety regulations. Human workers operated in environments that other species considered lethal, using equipment and techniques that pushed the boundaries of known technology. The freedom to innovate without committee approval had unleashed creativity on an unprecedented scale. "Nancy, the gravity generators for Section 15 are ready for testing," called her assistant from across the massive chamber. "Power grid shows green across all primary systems." Nancy activated her comm unit to coordinate with the control center. "This is White to Station Command. Section 15 is ready for first gravity test. All personnel clear the test zone." The activation was flawless, creating a stable gravity field that would allow normal human habitation in the new section. Within weeks, this area would house thousands of families in comfortable apartments with full amenities. The entire habitat would eventually support more people than most council homeworlds while remaining capable of interstellar travel if necessary. Dr. Pete Johnson's quantum tunneling breakthrough had revolutionized human transportation technology. Ships could now cross vast distances in hours rather than weeks, giving humanity unprecedented mobility and strategic flexibility. The implications for exploration and expansion were staggering, but the technology remained locked behind human borders where council species could not access it. The latest field tests confirm stable tunnel formation at distances up to 50,000 light-years, Pete reported to the research committee. "We could theoretically reach other galaxies with this technology." The research committee consisted entirely of human scientists who had been freed from council oversight and interference. Without the need to share discoveries with species that had treated them as inferior partners, human research had accelerated dramatically. Breakthroughs that would have taken decades under council bureaucracy were happening monthly in human laboratories. Chief Scientist Mary Clark announced another discovery that could have transformed galactic civilization if shared with council species. Her zero-point energy extraction process was clean, efficient, and scalable from personal devices to planetary installations. The technology could have ended energy shortages throughout the galaxy, but remained exclusively human property. The Mark 7 extractors are producing power output that exceeds our most optimistic projections, Mary explained to the engineering team. "We could power entire worlds with arrays smaller than traditional fusion plants." The energy breakthrough had already transformed human habitat construction. Massive industrial complexes operated on power that was essentially unlimited and completely clean. Manufacturing capabilities that had once required entire planets could now be contained within single space stations while producing higher output than ever before. General Tony Martinez reviewed fleet status reports that would have alarmed council military leaders. The combined human fleet had grown beyond its pre-Exodus strength and incorporated technology that made older ships obsolete. More significantly, the Cathari, Bolani, and Rim collective fleets had been rebuilt with human technology and training to create a military alliance that rivaled council forces. "General, the latest war games confirm our tactical superiority in all major categories," reported his strategic analyst. "Speed, firepower, defensive capability, and coordination all favor our combined forces over council military doctrine." Tony was not surprised by the assessment. Council military thinking had stagnated over centuries of comfortable dominance, while human forces had evolved through constant adaptation and innovation. The combination of human technology with the unique capabilities of their alien allies had created something entirely new in galactic warfare. The three species that had followed humanity into exile were experiencing their own golden age. The Cathari had always been skilled diplomats, but under council rule, their talents were overshadowed by larger powers. Now they served as human ambassadors to dozens of independent worlds, building alliances that bypassed council authority entirely. Bolani were natural warriors who had been forced into defensive roles by council politics. With human support and technology, they had become an elite military force capable of projecting power across multiple star systems. Their fleet movements were coordinated with human forces to create a defensive network that protected all allied territories. The Rim Collective had been struggling economically under Council trade restrictions that favored core worlds over peripheral regions. Human technology and investment had transformed their scattered colonies into thriving industrial centers that competed successfully with established Council powers. Captain Steve Anderson commanded the defense forces protecting the sanctuary, worlds where refugee populations from the 3 allied species had been relocated. These planets had become showcases of what was possible when different species worked together as equals, rather than in the hierarchical system that dominated Council space. Anderson to all defense platforms, long-range sensors show clear space in all directions. No sign of Council military activity near our borders. The sanctuary worlds were heavily defended, but the precautions seemed unnecessary. Council forces were too busy dealing with internal conflicts and economic problems to threaten human territories. The violence spreading through Council space had created refugee streams that overwhelmed their relief capabilities, while human allies prospered in peace and security. Dr. Amy Wilson compiled humanitarian reports from the border regions that painted a grim picture of life under Council authority. The hegemony wars had expanded to involve 17 star systems with billions of casualties and no end in sight. Medical facilities were overwhelmed and supply lines were breaking down as the conflict consumed resources faster than they could be replaced. The Beltar plague continued spreading through Council space after claiming 3 entire species. Human. Medical teams could have stopped the outbreak in its early stages, but Council pride had prevented cooperation until it was too late. Now the disease was endemic and would likely claim millions more lives before Council scientists found an alternative. Cure long-range sensors detected massive human expeditions launching toward the galactic rim and beyond. The fleet movement suggested exploration on a scale that no other species had ever attempted. Humanity was not just rebuilding in exile. They were expanding into territories that Council species had never imagined reaching. The galaxy was beginning to understand what they had lost when they dismissed humanity as too young and inexperienced for equal partnership. The same traits that Council leaders had criticized as primitive and emotional were proving to be humanity's greatest strengths. Adaptability, innovation, and determination had transformed exile into opportunity, while Council civilization stagnated in comfortable routine. The 5th year brought catastrophe to Council space on a scale that would have been unimaginable when humanity first walked away from the negotiating table. Ambassador Phil Carter watched from humanity's embassy to the independent worlds as the ancient galactic order tore itself apart through arrogance and internal conflict. The same pride that had driven humanity away now fractured the alliance that had dominated the galaxy for thousands of years. The Zephyrian economy collapsed first when their slave labor planets erupted in rebellion. Human broadcasts about freedom and dignity had reached oppressed populations throughout Council space, inspiring resistance movements that the established powers could not contain. Without human peacekeeping forces to maintain stability, the revolt spread like wildfire across multiple star systems. Phil, the latest reports show 17 more worlds in open rebellion against Zephyrian control, reported his intelligence officer. Their military forces are stretched too thin to respond effectively. Phil reviewed the data with mixed feelings. The suffering was terrible, but the rebellions were inevitable consequences of a system built on oppression and inequality. Humanity had tried to reform Council policies through diplomatic channels for years, but had been dismissed as naive idealists who did not understand galactic realities. The Vaxxon crystal mines that had powered galactic technology for millennia were producing barely enough output to maintain existing systems. Human workers had provided the efficiency and innovation that made large-scale extraction possible in extreme environments. Without them, the operations had become dangerous and unproductive as other species struggled to work in conditions that humans had handled routinely. Captain Steve Anderson commanded the defense perimeter around the sanctuary worlds, where allied species had found refuge from the chaos-consuming council space. These planets had become islands of stability and prosperity in a galaxy that was falling apart. The contrast between human-allied territories and council space grew more stark with each passing month. "Captain, refugee ships are requesting permission to enter our space," reported the communication officer. "They're fleeing the violence in the hegemony border regions." Steve consulted his standing orders before responding. Humanitarian assistance was permitted for genuine refugees, but council military vessels were prohibited from entering human space. The distinction was sometimes difficult to make when desperate people were fleeing violence that their own governments had failed to prevent. The hegemony wars had consumed 17 star systems in a conflict that showed no signs of ending. Ancient, enemies were settling scores that had been suppressed for decades by human diplomatic efforts. Without mediators who could find common ground between hostile factions, the violence escalated beyond anything the galaxy had seen in living memory. Dr. Amy Wilson coordinated humanitarian aid from her position at the border monitoring station. The refugee crisis overwhelmed council relief capabilities, while human facilities remained well organized and adequately supplied. The difference in competence and resources made the council's decline even more obvious to observers throughout the galaxy. "Amy, the latest casualty reports show over 2 billion dead across all active conflict zones," her assistant reported with horror. "Medical facilities in council space are requesting emergency assistance, but we're not authorized to provide aid beyond refugee processing." Amy felt the weight of preventable suffering that could have been avoided if the council had treated humanity as equal partners instead of dismissing their concerns. Human medical teams could have contained the Beltar plague before it spread to multiple species. Human peacekeepers could have prevented the hegemony wars from reigniting. Human engineers could have maintained the infrastructure that was now crumbling throughout Council territory. The old Galactic Council was effectively dead even though formal dissolution had not been declared. Member species were withdrawing from cooperative agreements and pursuing individual interests that often conflicted with former allies. The bureaucracy that had once managed galactic affairs was paralyzed by internal disputes and resource shortages. Captain Matt Davis observed the disintegration from his command post in the outer perimeter. Long-range sensors tracked the movement of military forces as various council factions prepared for conflicts that would have been unthinkable during the era of human participation. The galaxy was fracturing along ethnic and territorial lines that had been suppressed by the old order. Matt, intelligence reports confirm that the Vaxan and Zephyrian militaries are mobilizing for potential conflict over disputed mining rights, his analyst reported. Both sides are requesting human mediation, but we have no authorization to intervene. Matt was not surprised by the request. Human diplomats had successfully mediated dozens of similar disputes during their time in council space. The techniques and approaches that had maintained galactic peace for decades were now unavailable because council pride had rejected human equality and partnership. The economic collapse spread beyond individual species to affect galactic trade, networks that had operated smoothly for centuries. Human-protected shipping lanes were now controlled by pirates who operated with impunity against inadequate council security forces. Commercial traffic had dropped by 60% as merchants avoided routes that were too dangerous for profitable operation. Fleet Admiral Greg Thompson reviewed intelligence reports that confirmed the total transformation of galactic power structures. The council that had once dismissed humanity as insignificant now begged for assistance with problems that human expertise could have solved easily. The same species that had lectured humans about emotional immaturity were making desperate emotional appeals for help. "Admiral, we're receiving formal requests for military assistance from 12 different council factions," reported the communication officer. "They're offering various territorial and economic concessions in exchange for human peacekeeping support." Greg considered the irony of former council members offering bribes for services that humanity had once provided freely as part of their galactic citizenship. The offers were meaningless because the political structure that could have honored such agreements no longer existed in any functional form. Dr. Julie Brown documented the historical transformation from her research position aboard the academic vessel Socrates. The collapse of council civilization was happening faster than anyone had predicted when humanity first withdrew from galactic politics. The interdependence that had made the old system functional had been based on human capabilities that other species had taken for granted. The data confirms that council space has lost approximately 40% of its industrial capacity and 60% of its research output since human withdrawal, Julie reported to the Historical Committee. The decline is accelerating as critical infrastructure fails without human maintenance and innovation. The species that had mocked human inefficiency were learning that human methods had actually been the most effective approaches to complex problems. The emotional responses that council leaders had criticized as primitive were proving to be essential elements of effective decision-making and crisis management. Desperate council delegations continued approaching human borders with increasingly frantic requests for assistance. Each delegation was turned away with the same polite but firm message that had been delivered consistently for 5 years. The United Earth Federation would consider renewed contact when the galaxy was prepared to offer genuine equality and mutual respect. The transformation was complete and irreversible. The galaxy that had looked down on humanity as junior partners was now looking up to them as the only hope for restoring stability and prosperity to a civilization that was destroying itself through pride and prejudice. 7 years after humanity walked away from the galactic table, Fleet Admiral Greg Thompson received the formal invitation that represented everything the old council had refused to offer. The document was signed by representatives of 43 species who had broken away from the collapsed council structure to form a new confederation based on principles of equality, mutual respect, and voluntary participation. The invitation was delivered by Captain Lisa Turner, daughter of the president who would soon address the founding ceremony of what they were calling the Galactic Federation. The contrast with the old council could not have been more stark. Instead of demanding humanity's submission to established authority, the new organization begged for human participation as founding members and equal partners. Admiral, the preliminary charter guarantees equal representation regardless of species age or military strength, Lisa explained as she presented the documents. Every member world gets the same voting rights and veto power over decisions that affect their territory. Greg reviewed the terms with satisfaction. These were the same principles that humanity had proposed to the old council years ago, only to be dismissed as naive idealism from a young species that did not understand galactic realities. Now, those same realities had forced the galaxy to adopt human values or face continued chaos and decline. Dr. Julie Brown published her historical analysis of what scholars were already calling the Great Restructuring. The 7-year period had witnessed the most dramatic transformation in galactic civilization since the formation of the original council 50,000 years earlier. Humanity's exodus had forced every species to confront their own assumptions about power, cooperation, and the true foundations of stability. The data shows that humanity's withdrawal created a cascade effect that exposed fundamental weaknesses in council civilization, Julie wrote in her report. The system had become dependent on human problem-solving abilities, while simultaneously denying humans the respect and authority that should have accompanied such responsibility. The species that had dismissed human emotional responses as primitive weakness were now studying human psychology and decision-making methods. The same traits that council leaders had criticized were recognized as essential elements of effective leadership and crisis management. Universities throughout the galaxy offered courses in human diplomatic techniques and negotiation strategies. Captain Matt Davis presided over the founding ceremony of the Galactic Federation from his position aboard the diplomatic vessel Constitution. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the new assembly hall that had been designed according to human principles of openness and equality. No species held elevated positions or special privileges based on age or traditional authority. The Cathari delegation included Ambassador Veltar, who had maintained contact with humanity throughout the years of exile. His species had prospered under human alliance and served as living proof that cooperation between equals produced better results than traditional hierarchy and dominance. Matt, the Cathari ambassador, is requesting permission to address the assembly about the benefits of human partnership, reported the protocol officer. Matt granted the request, knowing that Veltar's testimony would carry special weight with species that were still uncertain about humanity's return to galactic affairs. The Cathari had experienced both systems and could speak with authority about the difference between council oppression and human cooperation. The Bolani military commander presented a detailed analysis of how human tactical innovations had revolutionized warfare while reducing casualty rates and collateral damage. Traditional council military doctrine had emphasized overwhelming force and brutal suppression of resistance. Human approaches focused on precise application of power combined with diplomatic solutions that addressed root causes of conflict. The Rim Collective economic minister explained how human trade policies had transformed peripheral worlds from struggling colonies into thriving industrial centers. Council economics had concentrated wealth and resources in core systems while keeping frontier regions dependent and underdeveloped. Human principles of fair trade and technology sharing had reversed centuries of systematic exploitation. President Lisa Turner addressed the new federation with words that acknowledged both the tragedy of the past 7 years and the hope for a better future. The galaxy had paid a terrible price for its arrogance, but the suffering had not been entirely in vain if it led to genuine reform and cooperation. We did not leave to punish anyone, President Turner explained to the assembled delegates. We left to show what the galaxy could become when built on respect rather than hierarchy. The old council treated some species as rulers and others as subjects. The Federation recognizes only partners and equals. The charter of the new Galactic Federation incorporated human principles that had been refined during the years of exile and tested in cooperation with allied species. Decision-making processes emphasized consensus building and compromise rather than majority domination. Economic policies promoted shared prosperity instead of concentrated wealth. Military doctrine focused on defense and peacekeeping rather than conquest and control. Dr. Pete Johnson's quantum tunneling technology was offered to all Federation members as part of humanity's commitment to shared advancement. The breakthrough that could have remained exclusively human property became the foundation for a new era of exploration and expansion that would benefit every member species. Chief Scientist Mary Clark announced that zero-point energy extraction would be freely shared with Federation partners, along with complete technical documentation and training programs. The technology that could have given humanity permanent economic dominance instead became a gift that would raise living standards throughout the galaxy. The 3 species that had followed humanity into exile were honored as founding members of the Federation with special recognition for their courage in choosing principle over convenience. The Cathari, Bolani, and Rim Collective had proven that loyalty to justice was more valuable than submission to authority. Engineer Nancy White oversaw the construction of Federation headquarters in a mobile space habitat that could relocate if political circumstances required. The choice of mobile architecture sent a clear message that the new organization served its members rather than ruling over them. If any species chose to leave, the Federation would respect their decision without economic or military retaliation. Captain Steve Anderson commanded the Federation peacekeeping forces that were designed according to human principles of intervention and conflict resolution. Instead of maintaining order through fear and suppression, the new military focused on protecting the innocent and creating conditions for peaceful solutions to disputes. The galaxy that had looked on in fear as humanity walked away from the table, now looked with hope toward a future built on human values of equality, cooperation, and mutual respect. The species that had once dismissed human emotions as primitive weakness now recognized them as essential elements of wisdom and effective leadership. The transformation was complete, but the work was just beginning. Building a truly equitable galactic civilization would take generations of patient effort and constant vigilance against the temptations of power and privilege. But for the first time in 50,000 years, the galaxy had a foundation based on justice rather than domination. Humanity had returned to galactic civilization, not as supplicants seeking approval, but as architects of a better future. The table they had walked away from was gone forever, replaced by a circle where every voice mattered and every species contributed to the common good. The galaxy would never again make the mistake of dismissing any member as too young or too different to deserve equal treatment and respect.